Mom installed a hidden camera at the summer house to catch thieves, and I forgot to tell my mother-in-law about it. Over the weekend, she went there to feed the chickens, and on Monday I checked the footage. What I saw shook me, but I pulled myself together and called my husband, saying only one thing. Your mother is a monster. And before we begin, I'd like to ask you to like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you and enjoy listening. Catherine was dusting her favorite porcelain vase when the phone rang. Thursday evening called for quiet household chores, not conversations. But her mother's voice on the line sounded unusually excited and, at the same time, conspiratorial. The information hit Catherine unexpectedly. It turned out that a week ago, while she had been busy with school matters, her mother, Amanda, had secretly gone to the summer house and installed a surveillance system. Thefts had become more frequent among the neighbors. Sometimes a watering can would disappear, sometimes gardening tools. The 75-year-old woman decided not to wait until someone reached their property. Can you imagine, Catherine? I bought a button-sized camera online. A young man helped me install it in the shed. It's completely inconspicuous. It reacts to movement, records everything onto a memory card, and then you can check it on your phone using a special app. Catherine listened in amazement at her mother's resourcefulness. In their family, all technical innovations were usually mastered by her husband, Bruce. And yet here was an elderly woman figuring out modern gadgets on her own. However, there was nothing particularly unusual about it. Thefts had indeed increased, and precaution never hurt anyone. I wrote down the app password on a piece of paper for you. I'll give it to you tomorrow. Just in case something happens, you'll be able to check that everything is okay at the property. After the call, Catherine returned to her household chores. The thought of the camera flickered through her mind and immediately dissolved among other concerns. She had to check students' notebooks, prepare dinner for her husband, and wash the accumulated laundry. The usual evening routine consumed her completely. Friday morning, she woke up to an insistent phone call. Bruce had already left for the factory, and the apartment was immersed in its usual morning silence. The display showed her mother-in-law's number, Beatrice Gonzalez. The 70-year-old woman's voice sounded surprisingly lively for such an early hour. Normally, her mother-in-law didn't like getting up early and didn't call before 10 a.m. But here it was 7:30, and she was already on the line. Catherine, dear, I wanted to ask you something. Can I go to your summer house this weekend? I want to see how things are there, feed the chickens, maybe weed the garden a bit. Catherine was taken aback. In all 30 years of knowing Beatrice, she had never once shown any interest in summer house chores. On the contrary, whenever the subject of going to the property came up, she would grimace and complain about mosquitoes, dirt, and the inconveniences of country life. And now, suddenly, such eagerness. Of course, you can. You have the keys. But why do you want to go, Beatrice? There's a lot of work right now. It will be hard. Oh, dear. I'm really quite frail. I just miss nature, the fresh air. It's so stuffy in the city, and there it's open, beautiful. And the chickens are probably missing their owner. There was a note in her mother-in-law's voice that Catherine had never heard before, a strange insistence, almost an obsession. Beatrice had never spoken of the beauty of nature or fresh air. Usually, she was interested in TV series, gossip with neighbors, and church services. Maybe another time? The weather is cool, and the road is long. It will be hard for you to get there. Oh, dear. I've already thought it all through. The bus to the gardening area runs regularly. And if anything, I'll call a taxi. I have the money, don't worry. Catherine almost dropped the phone. Beatrice, and a taxi. A woman who counts every penny and can walk an extra kilometer to save money was suddenly ready to spend on an expensive trip. Something was off. Are you serious, Beatrice? What taxi to the summer house? That's a fortune. If I really want to, Bruce will drive me on Saturday morning. There's no need to trouble your son, he's already tired from work. I'll get there myself, don't worry. Her mother-in-law's insistence was becoming stranger and stranger. Usually, Beatrice happily accepted any help, especially when it came to transportation. But now, she categorically refused her son's offer to drive her. Well, all right, as you wish. Just be careful there, don't overexert yourself. And if you need anything, call right away. After the conversation, Catherine stood by the window for a long time, pondering her mother-in-law's strange behavior. What could have made the elderly woman change her attitude toward the country house so abruptly? Beatrice used to go there only when absolutely necessary, and even then, reluctantly. However, she had to put her thoughts aside. It was time to get ready for work. At school, there were math tests that needed grading, and after classes, a faculty meeting awaited. The day promised to be hectic. Catherine quickly got dressed, grabbed her bag with notebooks, and ran out of the house. In her rush, she completely forgot about the conversation with her mother yesterday regarding the camera. The thought that she needed to warn her mother-in-law about the surveillance system flashed through her mind for a second as she was already getting on the bus. But then the phone rang, the school principal calling about the schedule. The conversation dragged on, and the thought about the camera faded from her memory, pushed aside by work concerns. The workday flew by as usual, in the rush of lessons, grading notebooks, and endless meetings. Catherine returned home late in the evening, tired and drained. Bruce was already asleep. His shift at the factory started early in the morning, so he went to bed no later than 10. She quietly went to the kitchen, brewed herself some herbal tea, and sat by the window. Thoughts about the strange morning conversation with her mother-in-law were still spinning in her head. Something in Beatrice's tone, and that sudden determination to go to the country house, was unsettling. But Catherine couldn't quite articulate her concerns. Saturday started early. Bruce was going fishing with friends, while Catherine planned to do a thorough cleaning of the apartment. At 6:30 in the morning, the doorbell rang. On the doorstep stood Beatrice in hiking attire, dark pants, an old jacket, and rubber boots. She was carrying several bulky bags. "Good morning, Catherine. I'm going to the country house." "Is Bruce still asleep?" "No, he's already up, in the bathroom." "You're up early today, Beatrice." Catherine couldn't help but notice the amount of luggage her mother-in-law had. 3 large bags for a one-day trip to the country house was clearly excessive. Usually, a small backpack with sandwiches and a thermos was enough for such outings. And what's with all the bags? "Oh, just some little things. Food for the chickens, brought along some garden tools. Maybe I'll be able to fix a few things." The answer sounded evasive. Beatrice clearly didn't want to go into details. She placed the bags by the door and went to greet her son, who was just coming out of the bathroom. "Mom, where are you off to so early?" "I'm going to your country house, dear. I've been wanting to see how things are there." Bruce was as surprised as his wife. His mother and the country house were almost incompatible concepts. But he didn't object, only offering to drive her to the bus stop. "No need, I'll walk. A stroll is good for someone my age." After his mother-in-law left, Bruce shook his head. "She's become strange. She never used to step out of the house, and now she's rushing off to the country house." Catherine nodded, sharing her husband's bewilderment. But she couldn't explain her unease. It was based solely on intuition and observation. The day passed quietly. Catherine took care of household chores, tidied the apartment, and went grocery shopping. Bruce returned from fishing happy and with a plentiful catch. In the evening, they cleaned the fish together and discussed plans for the next day. They didn't think about her mother-in-law until around 9 in the evening when Alice called. Beatrice's voice sounded excited, almost euphoric. "Catherine, dear, I had such a wonderful time. The air is so fresh, everything is so beautiful. All the chickens are healthy, I fed them and gave them water. I checked the garden, tomatoes are already ripening, cucumbers are growing. Your flowers are just lovely." Her mother-in-law's enthusiasm was striking. Catherine had never heard such ecstatic remarks from her about life at the country house. Usually, after any trips out of town, Beatrice complained about fatigue, mosquitoes, and the lack of city comforts. "That's wonderful that you enjoyed it. Are you staying overnight?" "Yes, of course. I'll do a little work in the morning and then head home. The bus is at 3, so I'll have plenty of time." There was something unnatural in the conversation. Beatrice spoke too loudly, too joyfully. Another oddity, the line was suspiciously quiet. Usually, in the evening at the country house, you could hear sounds, clucking chickens, rustling leaves, neighbors' voices. But here, complete silence, as if her mother-in-law were calling from an enclosed space. "Have the chickens gone to sleep already?" "What?" "Oh yes, yes, of course. They go to bed early, as soon as it gets dark. Smart little birds." The answer came with a hesitation, as if Beatrice was momentarily confused. Her voice carried a note of tension that hadn't been there at the start of the conversation. After her mother-in-law said goodbye and hung up, Catherine couldn't fall asleep for a long time. Something about that call had unsettled her, the unnatural cheerfulness, the strange silence in the background, the hesitation when asked about the chickens. All these little details added up to a disturbing picture. She tried to analyze her feelings. Maybe she was just being overly suspicious? Maybe her mother-in-law had really enjoyed the country house and was genuinely happy about the change of scenery? But her intuition whispered that something was wrong. Definitely wrong. Catherine turned onto her side, watching her husband sleep peacefully. Bruce always said she had an overactive imagination. Perhaps he was right, and she was worrying over nothing. But the unease didn't leave her until morning. Sunday began with rain. A fine, drizzly autumn rain tapped against the windows, bringing a sense of melancholy. Catherine woke up with a heavy foreboding she couldn't explain. She spent the entire day in a state of inner tension, anticipating something unpleasant. Bruce noticed her mood. "What's with the long face? Are you feeling sick?" "No, I'm fine. It's just the gloomy weather." She didn't tell her husband about her suspicions regarding her mother-in-law's behavior. It would have sounded paranoid. An elderly woman went to the country house. What's strange about that? In the evening, when the clock showed 8:30 and Beatrice still hadn't called, Catherine began to worry genuinely. The last bus to the city left at 5 in the evening. If her mother-in-law had missed it, how would she get home? She dialed Beatrice's number, but the phone was off. She tried several more times, same result. Battery dead? Or no signal in that area? Or had something more serious happened? "Bruce, your mom still hasn't come back from the country house. Her phone isn't answering. Maybe we should go check?" Her husband looked at the clock and frowned. "Yeah, it's a bit late, but she might have stayed over at the neighbor's and lost track of time. If she's not back by tomorrow morning, we'll go check." But Catherine's worry turned out to be unnecessary. At 9:30, the phone rang. Beatrice was home, in perfect order and in great spirits. "Oh, my dear children, sorry I didn't call right away. I was so tired, I barely made it home. I went straight to rest and didn't even hear the phone. Forgot to charge it at home, so it ran out." The explanation sounded plausible, but Catherine still felt uneasy. Her mother-in-law's voice again carried the same unnatural notes as the day before, too lively, too cheerful for someone who had just complained about being tired. "So, how was it? Did you enjoy the country house?" "Oh, I don't even know how to describe it. Such beauty, such bliss. Your chickens are excellent, laying well. The garden is in order, I did a little weeding. And the flowers. Especially the asters by the fence, they're just wonderful. Beatrice spoke nonstop, describing the delights of country life. But Catherine listened and felt her anxiety growing. There was something false, contrived in this enthusiasm. As if her mother-in-law was playing the role of an overjoyed country visitor while hiding something entirely different. But the asters aren't by the fence, they're near the veranda, Catherine said cautiously. There was a moment of silence on the line. Then Beatrice laughed. Oh yes, of course, by the veranda. I mixed it up. You know, memory isn't what it used to be. The explanation sounded strained. Beatrice had always had an excellent memory for details. She never confused the locations of plants in a garden she had known for many years. After the call, Catherine sat by the phone for a long time, trying to figure out what exactly was bothering her. Everything seemed fine. Her mother-in-law had gone to the country house, had a good time, and returned home healthy and happy. A normal story. Yet her intuition screamed otherwise. Going to bed, she still couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong. Too many oddities, the sudden desire to go to the country house, her insistence, the large number of bags, the unnatural cheerfulness in her voice, the mix-up with the flower locations. Each of these details alone could be explained, but together they formed a troubling picture. Catherine fell asleep with a firm resolve to visit the country house the next day and make sure everything was all right. Her instincts had never deceived her. And this time, they meant something. Monday began with the usual hustle. Bruce rushed to his shift, grabbing sandwiches on the go and complaining about the Monday blues. Catherine saw her husband off, cleared the breakfast dishes from the table, and thought about the day ahead. School holidays were ending. She needed to prepare lesson plans for the new term. Wiping the kitchen table with a napkin, she accidentally brushed against a stack of papers lying at the edge. A few sheets fell to the floor. Bending down to pick them up, Catherine noticed among the other notes a small slip of paper in her mother's handwriting. The uneven letters spelled out the name of an app and a password. The very information about the camera that Amanda had given her on Thursday. Over the weekend, she had gone there to feed the chickens, and on Monday, I checked the recording. Suddenly, the entire conversation with her mother came back to her memory, the camera at the country house, the surveillance system, the app on the phone. Curiosity got the better of her. She wanted to see how her mother-in-law spent her time on the property. Was it true that she weeded the garden beds and fed the chickens, as she had claimed? Catherine turned on her phone and found the app in the store. Downloading took a few minutes. Registration, another few minutes. Her fingers hesitated as they typed the password from the note. Her mother had always been meticulous with technical matters. Surely she had written it correctly. The screen loaded. A menu with dates appeared, Saturday, Sunday. Just the days Beatrice had been at the country house. Catherine selected Saturday morning and pressed play. The image was black and white, not very clear, but the scene could be easily made out. The camera was installed in the corner of the shed, covering most of the yard, the chicken coop, and part of the garden. The timestamp on the recording showed 9:30 a.m. A familiar figure in a dark jacket appeared on the screen. Beatrice opened the gate and entered the yard. But instead of heading straight to the chicken coop or the house, she stopped in the middle of the yard and began looking around. Slowly, methodically, as if searching for someone or something. Her behavior seemed strange. The mother-in-law was clearly wary of someone or looking for someone. She approached the fence, peeked behind the shed, even raised her head, as if checking the windows of neighboring houses. Then she returned to the center of the yard and continued inspecting. Catherine sped up the playback. Beatrice continued her actions for another 10 minutes, until she was fully convinced that no one was watching her. Only then did she head toward the house and disappear from the camera's view. The next half hour of the recording was empty. Occasionally, chickens wandered into the frame, pecking near the coop. Their familiar clucking and rustling could be heard. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then her mother-in-law came out of the house. In her hands were the same large bags she had brought in the morning. But now her behavior had changed drastically. No caution, no looking around. She moved quickly, purposefully, as a person executing a premeditated plan. First, Beatrice went to the chicken coop. Catherine turned up the volume, hoping to hear something, but the sound was too faint. Her mother-in-law opened the door and began working inside. A few minutes later, she emerged with a full bag. The bag moved and made muffled sounds. Catherine's heart sank. She understood what she was seeing, but her mind refused to believe it. Beatrice was catching the chickens one by one. Methodically, without hurry. She put each bird into a separate bag, tied it, and carried it to the fence. Within half an hour, the entire coop was empty, 32 hens and a rooster, the entire flock Catherine had raised for several years. But that was only the beginning. Having finished with the chickens, her mother-in-law turned to the garden. She trampled the tomato beds, pulled up carrots and tossed them aside, broke pepper bushes. Everything was done with a kind of manic determination, as if she were taking revenge not on the vegetables but on Catherine herself. Catherine shook from what she saw. Her hands trembled so violently that she could barely hold the phone. This was not just theft or vandalism. This was war. Declared without warning, cruel and vicious. Beatrice moved on to the flower beds. Asters grown from seeds, dahlias transplanted in spring, chrysanthemums just beginning to bloom, all were trampled mercilessly into the ground. She worked like a destruction machine, sparing not a single plant. Then it was the turn of the garden furniture. The tea table Bruce had made with his own hands was overturned and tossed behind the shed. Benches were scattered across the yard. The decorative windmill bought last year lay broken in the raspberry bushes, split in half. Catherine fast-forwarded the recording, switching between different time segments. The picture of destruction became increasingly complete. Her mother-in-law worked until evening, taking breaks only to drink water from the well. No signs of fatigue or hesitation, only cold, methodical cruelty. In one of the video clips, Catherine noticed that Beatrice was speaking. The woman stood in the middle of the wrecked garden, moving her lips and clearly saying something. Catherine turned the volume up to maximum and tried to read her lips. It was difficult, but she could make out certain phrases. "Now this trash will understand something," her mother-in-law said, trampling the remains of the tomato bushes. "Bruce will finally see what a real hostess she is." The motive became clear. This was not about senile dementia or a sudden lapse of reason. It was a planned operation to discredit her daughter-in-law. Beatrice wanted Catherine to appear incapable, a hostess unable even to care for her own country property. But Catherine pulled herself together. The initial shock passed, giving way to icy rage. A fire burned in her chest, threatening to consume everything in its path. Her hands clenched into fists, her jaw ached from the tension. No one had ever humiliated her so cunningly and cruelly. Her mother-in-law's plan was devilishly simple: destroy the property, then either plant the idea that the damage was caused by vandals or careless neighbors, or imply that Catherine herself was negligent in managing the household. In any case, the daughter-in-law's reputation would be undermined, and her husband would have a reason for complaints. Catherine continued watching the recordings. By Saturday evening, the destruction was complete. Her mother-in-law had walked across the entire property, surveying the results of her work. A look of deep satisfaction was on her face. She even smiled, admiring the chaos she had created. Sunday morning brought new discoveries. Beatrice came out of the house early, around 7 a.m. In her hands was a broom. Catherine thought her mother-in-law was going to clean up the traces of her vandalism, but she was wrong. The woman swept the paths carefully, meticulously, as if preparing for guests. Then she took garden gloves from her bag and began arranging the debris more artfully. Broken branches of rose bushes were laid out to look as if they had been snapped by a strong wind. Overturned furniture was placed to create the impression that vandals had been at work. This was no longer mere destruction, it was staging. Her mother-in-law was preparing a spectacle in which the leading role would be the hapless hostess, unable to protect her property. Every detail was planned, every element of chaos placed deliberately in the overall picture. Around 10 a.m., preparations for departure began. Beatrice moved the bags with chickens to the gate, hid them behind the fence, then walked around the property again, checking that she had forgotten nothing. Satisfied with the result, she entered the house. The next hour of the recording showed nothing. Apparently, her mother-in-law was resting before the journey home. Then she emerged, locked the house, and headed for the gate. The last frame captured her dragging the bags to the bus stop. Catherine leaned back in her chair, digesting what she had seen. The scale of the betrayal was staggering. 30 years of acquaintance, and she had never suspected her mother-in-law of such calculated cruelty. Beatrice had always seemed like an ordinary elderly woman, not particularly clever, not particularly mean. It turned out that was a mask hiding a cold and calculating enemy. But what was most shocking was the patience with which her mother-in-law had prepared her revenge. How long had she been plotting this plan? Weeks? Months? And how long had she hidden her hatred for her daughter-in-law behind a mask of polite indifference? The phone rang again. Her mother asked how she was doing and whether anything needed to be brought to the country house. Catherine answered mechanically, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Should she tell her mother what had happened? No, it was too soon. First, she needed to decide what to do next. After the call, she returned to the recordings. She wanted to make sure she hadn't missed anything, that she correctly understood her mother-in-law's motives. Every frame confirmed her initial conclusions. This was a planned act of sabotage. A particularly revealing moment came when Beatrice was talking on the phone. It was that same Sunday call during which she spoke about having a wonderful time. The recording showed her standing in the middle of the wrecked yard, smiling as she lied about healthy hens and beautiful flowers. Her mother-in-law's acting was flawless. There wasn't a trace of falseness in her voice, only genuine joy and gratitude for being in nature. Meanwhile, at her feet lay the wreckage of the decorative windmill and uprooted asters. Catherine realized she couldn't hesitate. Every minute of delay played into her mother-in-law's hands, who was surely already planning how to spin the story of the country house's destruction, how to present herself as a shocked witness to someone else's vandalism. Anger demanded immediate action. In moments like these, people make rash decisions they regret for the rest of their lives. But Catherine had the spirit of a fighter. She was not used to backing down from difficulties, and she had no intention of doing so now. Her first impulse was to go straight to her mother-in-law and confront her face to face, to shove the recordings under her nose, force her to admit guilt, and demand explanations. But common sense told her that this was not the best option. Beatrice would find a way to twist the situation, accuse her of lying, falsifying facts, or trying to tarnish the reputation of a respectable elderly woman. The second option was to tell her husband everything, show him the recordings, explain the situation, and ask him to take action. But this path was also uncertain. Bruce adored his mother and always sided with her in disputes. Would he believe that his saintly mommy was capable of such cruelty? Her mobile phone lay on the table, and Catherine stared at it for a long time, pondering her next move. Finally, the decision came naturally. The truth had to be spoken, no matter the cost. She dialed her husband's number. Bruce worked as a shift supervisor at the factory. He always kept his phone close. He answered after the third ring. "Catherine, what's wrong? You don't usually call during work." His voice was surprised but not alarmed. He had no idea that his world was about to collapse. Catherine took a deep breath, ready to speak the words that would change everything. "Your mother is a monster." She hung up before waiting for a response. Let Bruce digest the information, let him try to understand what happened, and then they would have a serious conversation, with evidence and facts. The phone rang again. Her husband was trying to call, demanding explanations, but Catherine did not answer. She needed time to calm down and plan her next steps. The emotional impulse had already occurred, now cold calculation was required. She saved the most revealing clips of the video in her phone's memory and made backup copies in the cloud. The evidence had to be irrefutable. Then she brewed strong tea and sat down to consider the situation. Beatrice had overestimated herself. She accounted for everything except one thing, the possibility of video surveillance. Her plan had no room for a witness who could capture all her actions. This was her main, fatal mistake. Now Catherine held all the aces. The question was how to play them. She could simply show the recordings to her husband and demand punishment for her mother-in-law. She could go to the police. Chicken theft and intentional destruction of property fell under criminal law. Or she could stage a public exposure, showing all the neighbors and acquaintances the true face of the pious Beatrice. Each option had its pros and cons. A family confrontation could end in reconciliation but was unlikely to change her mother-in-law's attitude toward her daughter-in-law. A police investigation would be effective but could damage her relationship with her husband. Public exposure would satisfy her sense of justice but would put the family drama on display for everyone to see. Catherine weighed all the pros and cons. The decision was not easy, but in the end, she chose the most radical path. Her mother-in-law did not deserve leniency. Anyone capable of such calculated cruelty must face deserved punishment. All that remained was to wait for her husband's return, explain the situation, show him the recordings, and share her plans, asking for his support. Bruce was a fair man. Once he saw the irrefutable evidence, he would not be able to side with his mother. At least, Catherine hoped so. The alternative was too terrifying to consider. If her husband did not believe her, if he sided with his mother despite all the evidence, it would mean the end of their marriage. And she was least prepared for such a turn of events. Time dragged agonizingly slowly. Catherine tried to busy herself with household chores, but her thoughts constantly returned to what she had seen on the recordings. The image of her mother-in-law methodically destroying the results of her work stood vividly before her eyes. Anger and disgust wrestled in her soul with a deep sense of disappointment. 30 years of life with Bruce, 30 years of dealing with his mother, and only now had Catherine seen the true face of this woman. How many more hidden grievances and concealed hatreds lay behind her mask of propriety? And what else might Beatrice have been capable of in her desire to harm her daughter-in-law? These questions haunted her until evening. That evening, the decisive conversation with her husband was to take place, a talk that would determine the future of their family and put all the dots over the I in their relationship with her mother-in-law. Catherine prepared for this conversation as if it were the most important exam of her life. How she presented the information, how convincing her arguments would be, mattered too much to allow any mistakes. The phone rang 10 minutes after her call. Bruce's number appeared on the screen. He was trying to reach her for the 5th consecutive time. Catherine stared at the vibrating device, gathering her courage. This conversation would determine everything going forward. "Catherine, what the hell? What are you saying? What happened with Mom?" Her husband's voice trembled with anxiety and confusion. In 30 years of marriage, he had never heard anything like this from his wife. Catherine was a restrained person, never allowing herself sharp words, especially toward her mother-in-law. "Come home, I'll show you the evidence. You'll see for yourself what your mother has done at the dacha." "Evidence of what? What are you talking about?" "Mom's been having health problems. Her health is fine. But her mind, there are serious problems there. Come, Bruce, I'll explain everything." The tone of her voice was icy, detached. Her husband felt it and was completely unsettled. He did not recognize this Catherine. Usually warm and gentle, now she spoke like a stranger. "I can't leave work right now. My shift runs until 6. I'll come later, and we'll sort it out. If you can't, don't. I'll deal with your mother myself." She hung up and immediately switched off the phone. No more conversations until a final decision on the next steps had been made. Catherine reviewed the most revealing fragments of the recordings once again. Every frame strengthened her resolve to see this through. Beatrice had gone too far to be forgiven or smoothed over with family talks. Half an hour later, she was already at the local police station. The building looked grim and official, but Catherine had no doubts. Justice was more important than family peace. The duty sergeant listened to her statement with surprise. Theft of chickens and property damage by an elderly woman was not a very common case in their practice. He directed her to Investigator Price, who handled property crimes. Harry Price turned out to be a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a skeptical expression. He listened to Catherine's account with evident disbelief. "Do you understand, ma'am, accusations like these against an elderly person? Are you sure you are interpreting what happened correctly? Maybe your mother-in-law just wanted to help, and something went wrong?" Catherine silently took out her phone and played the recording. The first few frames did not make a strong impression on the investigator, an elderly woman walking around the yard, looking around. But when the scene of verbal confrontation began, his expression changed. "Stop. Rewind. Show that again." Harry scrutinized every frame carefully. The methodical destruction of the garden, the devastation of the flower beds, overturning furniture, it was clearly no accident or help. "Do you have documents confirming ownership of the property?" "Of course. The dacha is registered in my husband's name, but I work there all the time, managing the household." "And the chickens, did you buy them?" "Any receipts, documents?" "Some I bought, some I raised myself." "That doesn't matter. What matters is that they were stolen and the property destroyed." The investigator watched the recordings again, taking notes, then looked up at Catherine. "We'll open a case. There are clear signs of theft and deliberate destruction of property. We'll file a report and seize the recordings as evidence. Tomorrow, we'll visit the site for inspection." Catherine felt a sense of satisfaction. The first stage was successfully completed. Now the case was not only in her hands but also in the hands of the law. She returned home by 6 in the evening. Bruce was already there, pacing the kitchen like a trapped animal. Seeing his wife, he rushed at her with questions. "Where have you been? Why did you turn off your phone? What's this story about Mom?" "I was at the police station. I filed a report against your mother. The investigation starts tomorrow." Her husband froze. He expected anything, but not this. Police, report, investigation, words that did not fit the image of his mother. "Are you out of your mind? What police? What are you talking about?" Catherine silently turned on her phone and showed him the recording. Bruce stared at the screen, horror growing with every moment. First disbelief, then shock, then something resembling despair. "This can't be true. Mom is not capable of this." "She is capable, as you can see." "Not only capable, but she did it." "But why? Why would she do this?" "Ask her yourself. She wanted to make me look like a bad housekeeper, to ruin our marriage. A simple, vile plan. Bruce sank into a chair, holding his head in his hands. The world around him was collapsing. The image of the loving mother he had carried in his heart all his life was cracking. Maybe she has problems with her mind. Senile dementia, some illness. Look closely at the recording. Everything is done deliberately, methodically. No signs of madness. They sat in silence for an hour, each processing what had happened in their own way. Then there was a knock at the door. Beatrice herself stood on the threshold. What's all the commotion? The neighbor called, says Catherine's telling terrible things about me. The mother-in-law looked as usual, a quiet, modest old lady in a worn coat and headscarf. It was hard to believe that this woman was capable of what the recordings had shown. Mom, sit down. We need to talk. Bruce turned on the video on his phone and handed it to his mother. Beatrice glanced at the screen and instantly went pale, but within a second she pulled herself together and returned the phone to her son. What nonsense is this? This is a fake. Catherine edited this video on purpose to slander me. The camera was set up by my mother, not me. And the recordings are genuine. Any expert can confirm that. Your mother? Of course, you two conspired against me. Planned it all in advance. Beatrice became enraged. Her quiet voice turned piercing, her hands shook with indignation. The mask of propriety had completely fallen away. For 30 years I tolerated that woman. 30 years I watched her boss my son around, turning him into a pushover, and now she even wants to lock me up. Mom, stop. Bruce was shocked. He had never seen his mother in such a state. I won't stop. Everything on the table. Yes, I destroyed her stupid dacha. And what did she deserve? Look at yourself, son. You've become a weakling next to her, a man walking under a woman's heel. The family scandal escalated by the minute. Beatrice unleashed years of pent-up anger and resentment. Catherine listened to this torrent of insults with a stone-cold expression. Now do you understand who your mother really is? This is her true face. Shut up, you filth! Screeched the mother-in-law. This is all your fault. If it weren't for you, my son would be happy. Mom! Bruce shouted. Apologize to your wife immediately. Never. I'd rather go to jail than apologize to that vile woman. The scandal continued into the deep night. Eventually, Beatrice left, slamming the door. Bruce remained sitting in the kitchen, crushed by what he had seen and heard. Why didn't you warn me about the camera? Why did you go straight to the police? And what would have changed? You would have sided with her, as always. Tried to cover everything up, find excuses. Maybe, but now our family is broken. I didn't break it. Your mother broke it with her actions. The next morning marked a new phase of confrontation. Investigator Harry arrived at the dacha with a team of experts. The inspection confirmed everything seen on the recordings: the garden destroyed, flower beds ruined, furniture overturned, clear signs of vandalism. But the most interesting part began when the investigator started questioning the neighbors. Catherine had no idea what revelations awaited her. Mindy from the neighboring plot said she saw Beatrice carrying some bags from the gate on Saturday morning. It seemed strange, but she didn't intervene. Jasper, who lived across the street, reported more serious incidents. I've suspected her for about 3 years. One time my cucumbers disappeared, another time my tomatoes. And once I saw my watering can in her yard. I thought she took it by mistake, but now I realize she was stealing. Samantha added, last year, one of my best hens disappeared. It was there in the morning, gone by evening. I thought a fox got it. Now I'm not so sure. Gradually, a picture emerged of years of petty theft and sabotage. Beatrice was not a random thief. She systematically engaged in mischief in the gardening community. We were all afraid of her, admitted Tracy. Quiet on the surface, but with these sharp eyes. If something went wrong, she could do something nasty. The Petrov family's dog was poisoned after a quarrel with her. The investigator carefully recorded all statements. By the end of the day, he had amassed a substantial file of materials. Beatrice had transformed from an ordinary grandmother into a malicious violator of public order. She was summoned for questioning a week later. Catherine deliberately went to the station to watch her mother-in-law's reaction. Beatrice was defiant, denying all accusations and citing her age and illnesses. "I'm a sick old woman, 70 years old. What thefts? What vandalism? It's all the doing of an eternally spiteful daughter-in-law." But when the video recordings were shown, her behavior changed sharply. At first, she tried to claim the videos were edited. Then, when the experts confirmed their authenticity, she moved to excuses. "Yes, I destroyed it. And what did that wretch deserve? 30 years of her mocking my son. What specific mockery?" The investigator asked. "She bosses him around like a servant, makes him work all weekend at the dacha, and he even thanks her for it." The motive for the crime became clear: jealousy toward the daughter-in-law, a desire to destroy her marriage with her son, and simple revenge for years of perceived domination. The case went to court 2 months later. By that time, Catherine had already grown accustomed to her new reality. Bruce had completely withdrawn into himself, barely spoke to his wife, and spent all his free time in the garage. In the courtroom, all participants of the drama had gathered. Beatrice sat on the defendant's bench in a black dress, portraying herself as a suffering figure. Her lawyer tried to frame the case as a family conflict unworthy of criminal punishment. "My client is an elderly woman who acted in a state of emotional distress. She did not have selfish motives but only tried to protect her son from the negative influence of his wife." But the prosecutor was resolute. "This is not a family conflict, it is a carefully planned crime. The defendant has systematically committed thefts from neighbors in the gardening community for many years, and this crime is the culmination of her criminal activity." Catherine testified as a witness. She recounted the events calmly, without emotion, relying solely on the facts. The judge listened attentively, asking clarifying questions. "Tell me, victim, what material damage has been caused to you?" 32 chickens worth about $5,000 in total. Destroyed vegetables and flowers, another $2,000, plus moral damages. Did you attempt to resolve the conflict within the family circle? What's the point of resolving a conflict with someone who has hidden their true nature for 30 years? I demand fair punishment. The climax of the trial was Beatrice's testimony. She stood at the podium and delivered a speech that shocked everyone present. "Yes, I did it, and I do not regret it. It especially destroyed my son's life, turning a real man into a henpecked husband. I just wanted to teach the ungrateful woman a lesson." "So, you admit your guilt?" the judge asked. "What guilt?" "I was defending my child. Any mother would have done the same." The courtroom gasped. No one expected such cynicism. Even the defendant's lawyer shook his head. Defending such a position was impossible. The sentence was harsher than Catherine expected. Beatrice received 2 years probation, with mandatory community service and restitution. The judge specifically noted the defendant's cynicism and lack of remorse. The court takes into account the defendant's age but cannot ignore the severity of the crime and her attitude. The crime was committed out of base motives, with particular cruelty. After the trial, Catherine felt emptiness instead of the expected triumph. Justice had prevailed, but at what cost? The family was shattered, her husband had grown distant, and her mother-in-law had become enemy number one. Bruce was waiting for her outside the courthouse. He looked 10 years older. Deep pain was evident in his eyes. Happy now? Your mother is now convicted. The family is in ruins. And what was I supposed to do? Stay silent, endure it. You could have warned me about the camera. You could have not run to the police immediately, could have tried to handle it as a family matter. And what would that have done? Your mother would have remained the same. And I would have been humiliated and insulted. You destroyed my family. She destroyed it herself. I just opened your eyes to the truth. The conversation reached a deadlock. Each remained firm in their opinion. Bruce could not forgive his wife for cruelty to his mother. Catherine had no intention of regretting her actions. The divorce was finalized 3 months after the trial. The process went quietly, without scandals or mutual claims. Simply two people who could no longer live together. The apartment had to be sold, and the jointly acquired property divided. Catherine bought a small one-room apartment on the outskirts of the city. Bruce rented a place closer to work. Catherine restored her dacha over the summer. She bought new chickens, replanted the garden, and planted flowers. But there was no joy in her work. Every plant reminded her of what had been destroyed by her mother-in-law. Beatrice served her sentence through community service, sweeping streets and cleaning parks. Neighbors avoided her, children pointed fingers. Her reputation was completely ruined. A year after the trial, Catherine received a letter from her ex-husband. Bruce announced that he was marrying a colleague, a woman 10 years younger, and asked her not to bother him or try to rekindle their relationship. She read the letter and tore it up. No feelings, except for a slight sadness. The past remained in the past, the future was uncertain, but free. A year and a half later, news came that Beatrice had been hospitalized with a stroke. Catherine did not go to visit her former mother-in-law, did not send flowers, and did not even inquire about her condition. What was the point of showing concern for a person who had spent so many years planning her humiliation? Beatrice recovered, but remained partially paralyzed. Bruce hired a caregiver and visited rarely himself. His new wife categorically refused to have anything to do with his mother. Catherine learned this from neighbors who had visited the dacha. They recounted it with satisfaction. Justice had prevailed completely. The cruel mother-in-law got what she deserved, and the daughter-in-law had defended her rights. But for Catherine herself, there was little triumph. Loneliness weighed heavier every day. Friends and acquaintances split into two camps. Some supported her, while others felt she had gone too far in punishing an elderly woman. Working at the dacha no longer brought joy. Every garden bed, every flower reminded her of that day when she first saw the camera recording, of how her former life had collapsed. In the evenings, sitting in her empty apartment, Catherine reflected on the price of justice. She had achieved what the mother-in-law wanted, she was punished, and the truth had prevailed. But it did not bring happiness. Bruce had been right, the family was truly destroyed. But it had not been destroyed because of the camera or the police report. It had been destroyed the moment Beatrice decided to declare war on her daughter-in-law. Catherine had only brought that war to its logical conclusion. She had won, but the victory was bitter. Justice had triumphed, but at what cost? The cost of 30 years of shared life, the cost of family, the cost of the future. Sometimes she thought, what if my mother hadn't installed the camera? My mother-in-law would have destroyed the dacha, blamed me or the neighbors. Scandals, grievances, the gradual destruction of my relationship with my husband, maybe the outcome would have been the same, but stretched over years. The camera only accelerated the inevitable, revealing the true nature of the people I had lived next to for 30 years, a husband who loved his mother more than his wife, and a mother-in-law who had harbored malice for 3 decades, waiting for the moment to take revenge. The truth freed her from illusions, but it did not bring happiness. Catherine remained alone, but with a clear conscience. She had not betrayed herself, had not endured humiliation, and had not allowed her life to be trampled. Justice had prevailed, but the price was so high that sometimes she asked herself, was it worth it? The answer did not come immediately, but it was always the same: it was worth it. Because life built on lies could not continue indefinitely. Because everyone must answer for their actions. Because justice is more valuable than family peace built on deception. She had paid for the truth with everything she had. But there was no other choice, and she regretted nothing. On the last day of summer, Catherine sat at her restored dacha among new flowers and young vegetables. The chickens pecked peacefully at the grain. The sun was setting on the horizon. Beauty and calm surrounded her. But in her soul there was emptiness. Justice had prevailed. The price had been paid in full. Life went on, but it was completely different now. Without a husband, without a family, without illusions. But it was honest and real. And Catherine knew she had done the right thing. No matter how dearly that righteousness had cost her.